So, you know what's fun? Making new stuff. But you know what isn't fun? Maintaining your old stuff. So I thought, how about instead of writing documentation for my old packages, build something new that just lets me write the documentation for them in a more fun or better way. And that's what I did. And I called it Toot. Where's my pointer? Toot. For Typst opinionated online tutorials. And in the next 10 minutes, I'd like to show you what it does. So hi everyone, I'm Andreas. I'm a PhD student from Leipzig, just an hour from here. And some of you might know me as the author of Typst packages such as Polylux for presentation slides, which you also see in action here, or Loveless for typesetting pseudocode. And I've also built an integration of Julia into a types called Jellyfish. And today, Toot. So why Toot? I wanted to write documentation for my Typst packages and look at them in the browser, like have them online. And I also wanted to have like images of the examples rendered inside this documentation. And some of you might know mdBook, which is quite a nice tool. I've used this extensively. And it has some nice properties. For example, it gives you a bunch of static HTML pages, which makes it very easy to deploy. It's just one coherent book. You can very conveniently navigate between the different pages. But sad thing is, it uses Markdown. So I thought, can we have something like mdBook, but voila. Oh, it doesn't work. Oh, now it works. But with Typst. Dramatic pause. And before we jump into the technical details, we can have a very quick look at how Toot looks. So one of my packages, Loveless for typesetting pseudocode, is already using Toot for the documentation. And we couldn't look at the website, but I think for the sake of time, let's just stick to the screenshot. And you see we have some more ordinary text where you explain stuff. On the left-hand side, we have this navigation menu where we can navigate between different pages. And then we have code blocks. And that's the nice thing. Together with this code blocks, we have images showing you how this then would look. And for those of you who prefer to live on the dark side, of course, everything works in dark mode as well, including the images of the examples. So how would you go about writing such a Toot tutorial yourself? It's mainly 3 elements, I would say. So you start off by importing from a special setup file that you have as part of your project, and that's kind of like configuration file. And it provides you with 3 things. One is this Toot page function, with just a template function that adds like the menu and navigation and stuff. Then you write the content, and there you can use those examples. And how do you use examples? Well, you just have this example function, and it expects some Typst code. And this has some nice features. For example, you can use snippets. For example, you have this font size snippet, so that you don't always have to write, I want this and this font size or so in all your examples. And then you have to change it at all places if you want to change this. Just use the snippet that you can define yourself. So those are expanded. And then also you'll probably have some code that is necessary for rendering it, like for example setting the font size, but you don't want to show it in your example. It's not relevant for like the user of your package. So using those start and stop markers, you can hide parts of the code. And then all this gets rendered to SVG in light and dark mode, and you have nice images. And then the last, I think, major feature it offers is some cross-linking functionality, so that you can link from one of your pages in the book to others. And then if you want to actually build the website, Toot comes with a CLI called Toot Builder. And yeah, it handles all the magic stuff for you. So it does 3 steps in principle. The first step is it reads a certain file called source outline. If you've used mdBook before, there's this summary.md, and here it's just called outline. And it contains like the structure of this navigation menu in principle. And now by querying it, it just queries it for those links, and then it finds all the files that are referenced in this outline, and then it knows what the files are to build. So if you want have it like a draft, something they don't want to have in the book, you can just leave it out of this outline, and then it won't appear. So now it has collected all those files, and then as a next step, it finds out what the examples were that were defined in those files. It renders them to SVG, and then in the end, puts everything together, creates a static website, and then we're done. And I would say most of this is actually pretty straightforward. So it's just some shell scripting, glorified shell scripting maybe, and shuffling files around. So most of that is really not that complicated. The one thing that maybe is a bit more interesting is how those examples are actually rendered. And I've used one of the, I would say, oldest tricks in the Typst playbook. You could call it poor man's shell escape. So it works the following way. As the user of Toot, you write something like this, right? Which we have seen before, like this example function with some code. And now what happens with this? So the example function gets expanded to this thingy here. So first we have just a code block containing only the code that's actually relevant for the reader later on. So only what we had between start and stop here. And then as a next step, we add in some metadata, which is always very handy when you want to make something available for external programs. So we have this metadata that contains the actual code to be compiled. So you see this set text, this comes from this font size snippet, and then everything else that's necessary. And we also give it an ID so that we can refer to this example later on. So that's the metadata. And then, of course, we want to show the actual image that's supposed to be displayed. But the issue is this file doesn't exist yet, right? I mean, we have to render it first. So we can only show this if we are in some special, let's say, build mode that we activate using this toot build flag, let's say. And for those of you who haven't seen this before, so sysinputs is a very handy way to allow you to provide CLI arguments to the Typst CLI, and via sysinputs you can read those arguments. Okay, so this is how the code gets expanded. Now, what does the Toot builder actually do with this? First thing is it queries this file. So let's say it's called a.type. Then it would query it for this Toot example label, and it would give it all the metadata containing all the code of the examples. Then it can just now I have it. Can just pipe this code into the Typst compiler, generate an SVG out of this, and finally, now that we have this image that we want to include, we can just compile the file so we compile it to HTML, and we use this toot build flag, set this to true, and now when we compile this whole thing, it actually enters this branch and introduces this image. And that's mainly it. So to be honest, this is more of the bird's eye view. Actually, there are some more details concerning, for example, as I said, we have light and dark mode for the images. So this gets handled, and maybe some of your examples produce multiple pages. So there's some handling for that. And it also minifies the SVG that's produced and the HTML that's then resulting from the Typst compilation. So all this comes on top, but in principle, it works like this. And yeah, as I said, it's kind of like the poor man's shell escape. So basically, whenever you think I would like to have a shell escape, I would like to call the shell command from inside my Typst document. This is what I would recommend you do. Just add some metadata, query for this metadata, and then you're good to go, basically. And with this, I'd like to come to an end, and I have 4 closing remarks for you. So the first one is that currently the command line interface is written in Julia, which is just the language I'm very comfortable with. And it turns out that Julia is a very, very convenient scripting language. So if you want to do shell scripting, Julia works financial. But yeah, applause for Julia, apparently. Nice. You can view those pages on mobile. I think it works quite decent. I've put some work into this, but there are some improvements planned. And maybe if some of you is like a front-end person, we can have a chat later on what you think about this. As I said, I've already used it to write the docs for Loveless, and I'm in the process of writing the Polydocs documentation also in Toot. And so far, it works really nice. So it's just much more convenient than what I had before. And finally, I'm very excited for the multi-file output. That's hopefully coming to Typst native soonish, I don't know. Because I think this does have quite some implications for tools like this, so I'm very excited to how this then all works out. So if you like, give Toot a try, and either later today or then somewhere online, please get in touch, and thank you very much. Any questions?
Yeah, I have some, but I'll keep it to one for now, in case anybody else wants to ask. Number one, thank you, because that sounds really great, and I'll probably use this. Number two, self-advertisement. I don't know if you have heard of pre-query. It's basically a tool that helps you do the querying and then recompiling with different setting stuff. So if you want, look into that, and other people as well. And now the question, let's start with this one. Alembic, have you thought about modeling the examples as Alembic custom elements so that the user could decide whether, for example, example code and rendered example should be next to each other or under each other and stuff like that?
I haven't, and I'm not even sure if that's necessary for that. I mean, there are some config options already. For example, as I said, if you have multiple pages, for an example, you can already configure like in how many columns they're supposed to be shown next to each other and stuff like that. I think you don't need like custom type support for that. I think this should already work.
So I have the docs for my language in mdBook, and I'm currently hacking in Typst files into mdBook, which is awesome. That's
what I did before, yeah.
Could I use your thing without the types example, and would that be better than mdBook? Or if I don't want to have any types code in my docs?
I think then it doesn't bring you much. Yeah, I think that's the main advantage. Otherwise, stick to. I mean, yeah, sure. It also brings you that you can write the text in types. Sure, that's nice. But I think there are other solutions as well that work then as well.
Yeah. Have you any idea how well this would integrate with Tidy and stuff like that? So that you cannot only write basically the book, just write the book, but also document APIs that you already have in your Typst package, for example?
The short answer, I don't know. I know that Tidy exists, but I've never looked into it, never used it. So I guess it would make sense to kind of integrate that, yeah, but the T in Toot stand for the second one stands for tutorial, so it would be kind of illegal to do this, but yeah, we could still think about this.
Okay, thank you very much, Andreas.